Welcome again, Susan. It's such an absolute pleasure as well to have you back. And I'm dying to hear what you've been up to and how things are going. Over to you in Kenya.
Thank you so much, Liz. And honestly, the pleasure is always all mine to be part of the conference, and so much gratitude to you and Paramita and your team. Good morning. It's very early in the morning here in Nairobi, Kenya. It's still very dark outside and it's really unseasonably cold at the moment. But it's such a pleasure to be here. And I've got a brief talk for you all this morning, which is a little bit different from the talks that I usually give. Today we're going to be talking a little bit with some practical applications of what happens when we don't apply empathy to our systems. So I've previously spoken at this conference about my beliefs around empathy being a projection of our inner selves onto the outside world, and how in my personal circumstances, I believe it was the projection of empathy that created the work I now do through my organisation, Intuit Africa, which operates in Kenya and Rwanda. Intuit Africa is a social enterprise, and it shows the power of possibility when we join resource-rich and resource-poor to create a more equitable humanity. Intuit Africa runs schools, arts programs, theatre groups in resource-poor communities in Kenya. And I believe that some of my children are going to be sharing a little bit of their work with you after my talk. So I use empathy in action in lots of different ways, also through raising my three of my youngest children as social entrepreneurs, and my 9-year-old, 13-year-old and 18-year-old all run their own social enterprises, really based around the fundamentals of using empathy as a foundation for establishing their systems of business, but also the systems of how they work in the world. The profits from my kids' businesses go into projects that we run in Kenya. So it's really about raising my children as contributors. And I know many of you have met and been exposed to my kids before. But today I'm here to talk about how systems that lack empathy, and how if we want to create a more peaceful society, we need to shift from the patriarchal paradigms we currently operate under to a system that's based on the virtues of empathy and love. In 2020, Omar Lali Omar became an international public figure when he was accused of murder. Omar has been a friend of mine for nearly 30 years. Sure, his name has been synonymous in Kenya for various reasons, but never had he been referred to as a murderer. In 2020, that all changed, and Omar became the most famous murderer in Kenya. Was it because she was rich and he was poor? Was it because his light activated our darkness? Was it easier for us to blame than take responsibility for our role in her death? Or was it because the system found it easier to persecute a poor fisherman who walked shoeless around the island he lived on off the coast of Kenya? A system that saw his dreadlocks as a symbol of fear and therefore requiring no empathy. In another case, at the age of 6, another friend of mine whose name is Mensie Bitaya was thrown into a pit of bodies during the genocide in Rwanda. He watched his family massacred in front of his eyes. He sat as the world watched, offering no empathy to him or his circumstance. Mensie reached into the pocket of a body lying next to him and found the ID of his older brother, thus identifying him. To a lesser extent, I too have lived through a system that lacked empathy. When my husband manipulated the Australian judicial system and had me convicted of violence towards him when the opposite was actually the truth. The system offered me no empathy and systematically worked to destroy my life as it had attempted to with Omar and Mencia. I love to dream about what the world would look like if we had systems that operated from a frequency of empathy rather than power and control. We've all heard stories about people sitting on death row who have been wrongly accused. And we all know children, we all know stories of children who have no food, inadequate shelter, not enough education. And some of those children are actually going to be singing for you shortly. A song that asks, will you see us even though we lack money? Can you see us through the empathy that connects us all as one humanity? It seems that in a system that lacks empathy, you're measured by the size, your worth is measured by the size of your bank account. What would the world look like if our systems were designed to uplift, support, and collaborate rather than compete, belittle, and shut down? When we consciously apply empathy to our system designs, everything feels different. When there is empathy, we feel good. We know we can share. We know all will be well. The opposite applies when there is no empathy created around the system design. When we apply empathy to our system, when we apply empathy to our system design, the violation of human values takes a different step, because instead of looking at those violations through the lens of fear, we look at them through the lens of empathy, and immediately they soften. Omar isn't a murderer. He now sees his imprisonment as a time of contemplation, a time to activate greater compassion and empathy within himself. Omar and I are currently writing a book, and it's called Born to Heal. We're also about to launch our first photographic exhibition at the Sala Festival in Adelaide next month. Mencia has never seen himself as a victim of genocide. He runs a small school in Rwanda where he contributes to the lives of very vulnerable children. And his whole curriculum is based around the ethos of creating a system through empathy. And despite the conviction of domestic violence I was labelled with by a system that lacked empathy, I'm not the perpetrator of violence. Both Omar and Mencia apply the frequency of empathy to their daily lives, and as a result, offer contribution to others free from competition, bureaucracy, and fear. They have lived through the pain of a lack of systemic empathy, as have most of us, and know how the application of empathy to our systems will hold the power to change the world. Thank you.